Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into the murky waters of ancient Rome, where doctors were less about healing and more about hosting a leech party. Get ready to explore a world where your physician might just love creepy crawlers more than your well-being. Forget everything you know about modern medicine. Think more bloodletting and less birth control. So before you get comfortable, do me a solid, like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. We're all friends here, right? Leave a comment too, letting me know where you're tuning in from and what the time is. It's always a wild time zone adventure in this world. Now dim those lights, crank up that fan to simulate a light breeze, like the one you won't feel in a Roman sauna, and settle in. Let's take a moment to think. How do you feel about blood-sucking creatures? Would you trust a doctor who believes that a few leeches can cure what ails you? How much faith would you have in a surgeon who moonlighted as a barber? What would you think of having to bargain for treatment with some poor guy who's already had his share of leeches? Can you even imagine the ancient medical advice they try to sell you? And now, congratulations, you've just woken up in Rome, circa 200 AD. You're sick, you're confused, and the nearest doctor is already planning a celebration for his personal collection of leeches. Welcome aboard. Picture this. You're in a bustling Roman marketplace surrounded by vibrant colours, scents, and the occasional flying tomato. Here, doctors are hailed as miracle workers. But how much of that is reality? Is it true that they use techniques just as dubious as trying to ward off evil spirits by dancing in a chicken suit? You might find yourself pondering how much faith you could put in a physician who, before prescribing treatment, consults the nearest soothsayer about the alignment of Jupiter and Venus. Talk about making your medical appointment an intergalactic event. In this melting pot of bizarre medical practices, you quickly realise that the Romans were deeply captivated by the four humours theory, which held that an imbalance of bodily fluids, blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile was the root cause of all ailments. It's like placing the entirety of your health on a Rubik's Cube with two sides missing. And suppose you came in complaining about a pesky headache or chronic back pain. A Roman doctor might direct you to take a long breath, balance your humours, and maybe, just maybe, enjoy a nice dousing of leeches to restore equilibrium. Because why not introduce some live worms into your personal wellness routine? It's not like you're going out to brunch. Imagine sitting on a straw-filled bench in a clinic surrounded by other unfortunate souls. You look around to see it crowded with people crammed in like sardines, both human and otherwise. The doctor, dressed in a toga like it's a personal fashion statement, examines you with all the enthusiasm of someone deciphering a document written in a language that hasn't been invented yet. If you're lucky, he might throw in a spoonful of some homemade herbal concoction that smells suspiciously like the bottom of a well-used tavern tankard. Ah, yes, he says with serious conviction. A touch of cocklebur should clear that right up. Next, you're told to partake in a delightful practice known as bloodletting. Yes, you heard that right. In the medical world of ancient Rome, a few excess pints of your life essence could do the trick. Why rely on antibiotics when you can just take a risk with a sharp tool and the possibly infectious neighbour's old scimitar? Just be prepared to see your doctor leaping into action like a sloppy swashbuckler, wielding leeches and knives or, if you're really unlucky, their own bare hands. Mouths agape, onlookers would cheer for the spectacle, because to be honest, there's nothing like a lanced boil and the smell of blood mingling with butchery to turn a bad day into a real party. But let's not completely overlook the Romans' creativity in medical practices. They had a treasure trove of remedies that today sound like ingredients from a witch's kitchen. Chickens were often employed, not just as food, but as magical pets. Doctors would instruct patients to rub oily chickens over their maladies, claiming this would absorb the illness away. Now if you thought walking around with a leech on your arm was strange, wait until you find yourself dodging angry fowls while trying to maintain some dignity. And let's not get started on using crush bugs, because clearly the ancient Romans believed the secret to health was squashing live insects, stirring them into a medicinal mush, and hoping for the best. As for surgeons, don't you dare think they were the family-friendly kind you see in the modern-day hospitals, comfortably swathed in scrubs. No, thank you very much. In ancient Rome, your surgeon was likely more concerned with his next gig at an arena than your healing process. Yet much like today, they were divas of the trade, performing intricate procedures, albeit with tools not much better than a rusty nail and a side of battlefield enthusiasm. If you were in need of a limb amputation, you could forget about any soothing music or comforting words. It was a quick and brutal affair, punctuated by the doctor yelling at you to man up. So, while the Roman world might paint a picture of bravery and superior medical skills, the truth is a little less glamorous. These bizarre practices, comical as they are, showcase just how far the ancient Romans were willing to go in the name of health, often with more faith in rituals than actual medical science. And as you shake your head, imagining the chaos of it all, remember this: every modern doctor who relies on humour to heal might just be following in the muddled footsteps of their Roman predecessors. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, thank your lucky stars that you don't have to take your medicine by becoming a human pincushion. Or worse, an audition for a poultry show. Congratulations! You've stumbled upon the early ancestors of modern-day barbers. In Rome, your haircut could come with a side of bloodletting. Ever had to choose between a fresh fade and a leech rinse? What a trade-off. As you sit back in the wooden chair, if you can call it that since it resembles more of a rustic plank with a few nails sticking out, you take a moment to breathe in the aroma of burnt hair mingling with something decidedly less pleasant. Is that the true scent of ancient Roman healthcare? Yes, my friend, welcome to the chaotic world of barber surgeons, where clean cut might just mean avoiding an infection. Now, let's talk tools of the trade, because you're definitely going to want to know what's buzzing around your head. Your barber is armed with a terrifying array of instruments that might have just as easily been used for construction as for a haircut. Among the usual suspects, razors, scissors and combs are a few dubious devices that wouldn't be out of place in a horror movie. What's that shiny contraption? Oh, just a bone saw. Don't mind if I do, you think, as you casually glance away, wondering if you should have opted for a more straightforward approach, like letting your hair grow wild until finding a decent Roman physician wasn't as life-threatening. In a time when hair care came hand in hand with medical treatment, the barber surgeon had a dual purpose. 1 minute he's trimming your unruly locks, the next he's using that very same razor to cut you wide open. Casual, right? Just imagine a friendly conversation about your last hangover or political gossip, while all the while he's about to poke around your innards with a rusty knife. It's like having a family member over for dinner, only that family member routinely takes out your liver too. If that sounds like a great deal, just wait until you hear about the warm beer they offer to help with the pain. And while we're on the subject of pain, let's discuss bloodletting, shall we? They believed that to restore balance, the humours needed to be adjusted, mostly by draining a little blood. Why do you feel sick? Clearly it's because there's too much blood in your system, duh. You sit in the barber's chair, confident they'll simply give you a light trim, but before you know it, you're ushered into something akin to an impromptu operating room. Just a few leeches, he says, with all the charm of a used car salesman. Seriously, did he really think that slapping a handful of leeches on your arm would satisfy anyone's medical needs? A little suction here and there and voila, you're cured, or at least 10 leeches lighter in weight, But in the hands of a barber surgeon, leeches were akin to seasoned professionals. The trick is to know when to stop. Too few leeches, and you're still aching. Too many, and you risk being turned into an ancient Roman raisin. Imagine coming in for a simple haircut and emerging feeling like you've just emerged from a horror flick, pale and a little bit dizzy. Meanwhile, your barber, with unflinching confidence, claims it's for your own good as he pats himself on the back for his performance. You have to admit he has some nerve, not unlike the groundlings applauding a stage play as the actors swing swords at each other's faces. Let's take a step back, shall we? How did people stay loyal to these barber surgeons? Well, when every second person in Rome was stricken by ailments ranging from plague to questionable diets, involving far too many fermented fish heads, barber surgeons became part therapists, part fortune tellers. If you want to hear the latest gossip, always including tales of the great Roman villa down the street, you can bet that your barber would indulge you. That haircut costs as much as a few wine jugs, so you might as well make it worth your while. And remember that the Roman Empire was rife with social class distinctions. You might walk in as an uncertain plebeian and emerge as an esteemed citizen, or perhaps the unfortunate subject of a medical anecdote that travels through their spens out a storytelling circle on the corner of your favourite tavern. You'd think there might be some regret, but it seems that the art of ancient Rome, be it art or self-mockery, tore through the fabric of society with glee. So, as you absorb the echoes of ecstatic laughter and dubious medical practices wafting through the air, all while considering that your hair may never look quite the same, know this. While you might walk out with a stylish set of locks, you'll also get a freshly drained pint of blood and a leech that surely missed its career as a social influencer. Would you return for a second visit? Why not? After all, just like in the world of modern medicine, there's no room for vanity when it comes to survival. So, how does one determine if you have a bad case of the sniffles or are merely possessed by a cranky spirit? Ancient Romans had their own peculiar diagnostic practices. Spoiler alert. It usually involved looking at your urine more than was socially acceptable. If you're thinking that sounds like a medieval bathroom inspection, you'd be right. They viewed urine as a kind of mystical liquid, a direct window into your inner health. In fact, physicians would spend as much time analysing the colour, smell and consistency of your pee as modern coffee drinkers do assessing their morning brew. If it looked like apple cider, congratulations! You might just be harbouring some nasty ailment. If it resembled, well, anything other than that, situationally speaking, you were in big trouble. Roman doctors didn't stop with your urine analysis. They'd probably pull you up on a stool, beckon a gaggle of onlookers, and conduct a full-on personal exploration. Because who doesn't love a crowd while discussing their gastrointestinal issues? Lungos or breath tests were a hit, where doctors would lean in, what feels like an inch from your face, and inhale like they're determining the quality of fine wine. Very herbal. I detect fennel, but also the odour of impending doom. What, were they also expected to guess if your dinner was expensive or just those leftover beans from last week? Your fate was in their hands, and these ancient physicians could call you a carrier of bad humour before you even finished your answer. If you thought that was strange, get ready for their psychic side. Alongside urine and lungos, many doctors employed the art of augury. Yes, as in reading omens through birds. If a raven flew left over your house while you were busy sneezing, clearly that meant your cold was the result of divine retribution. Talk about a plot twist. Need a prescription? Sorry, that's only for the birds. Always felt like a doctor handing you a prescription for a trip to a fortune teller instead of an actual remedy. Oh, you broke your arm? Have you tried asking a pigeon for advice? But let's not forget about the good old humours, a burgeoning philosophy adopted from the Greeks. Ancient Roman doctors believed your health depended on a balance of 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Think of it like a messed up cocktail party. If one of those party crashers got out of hand, then your health would get out of hand pronto. Too much blood? Enjoy the leeches. Black bile? Let's purge that with a nice dose of laxatives and scare you silly. How's that for a riveting night in? And if heaven forbid you were down with a cough, expect a lovely round of bleeding until you feel lighter already. You see, Rome's diagnostic practices were basically a comedic bedtime story with a twist. Everyone left with more questions than they came in with. You might feel like you survived a checkup by $1 million team of lawyers instead of wellness enthusiasts. Imagine you emerge feeling as if you lost not just a pint of blood, but perhaps your dignity as well. Did they just say sacral? Meanwhile, let's talk about those herbal remedies, shall we? You might think, the Romans had herbs. Let's celebrate. But let's be real. They believed powerful concoctions would cure just about anything. Want to ward off that cold? A nice blend of ground-up toadstools and rancid goat bile should do the trick. Who needs cough syrup when you can sip on, I hope I don't get poisoned tea? Now, some treatments were surprisingly more rationale than a carnival show. Surgical herbs were often paired with precise actions. If the local barber surgeon had spent years honing his craft, that could be a collective sigh of relief amid all the chaos. However, let's hope he never mistook dropping an ear for an art installation. Lastly, let's briefly touch on the power of persuasion, because honestly, that was half the battle. If your doctor had a booming voice and a face that could launch 1,000 sails, you were likely to trust whatever they spewed, including wild recommendations about collecting snake oil in your neighbour's toenails. So while diagnosing ailments in ancient Rome might have ended in bloody spectacles and wild tales of ill spirits, it was all about how well you could navigate this chaotic comedic mess. And hey, at least you weren't alone. Everyone else was muddling through it just as clumsily. Fast forward to today, and we still have our own dizzying diagnostic adventures, hopefully just with a bit less urine inspection and unnecessary leech parties. Bloodletting. A great way to show your doctor that you really care about their leech collection. Forget diagnostic tests. If you're lucky, the most they'll do is remove a pint or two while discussing the weather. In ancient Rome, bloodletting wasn't just a medical procedure, it was practically a rite of passage, calling all the leeches to the stage like it was their day to shine. "Cheers to rebalancing your humours," the doctor would announce, triumphantly wielding a rusty blade while you quietly reconsidered your choices. Needle? Scissors? How about a trusty old dagger that had seen way better days? The whole concept stemmed from the belief in humorism, which is not what you might think. Dreamy romantic comedies starring leading men in tunics, for instance. Instead, it posited that 4 essential bodily fluids, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, dictated your health. If blood was deemed excessive, well, it was time to take a lot of it out. Imagine if we took that logic to heart today. Oh, you're feeling sad? Just a pint of blood and 10 leeches should do the trick. Smile through the pain, my friend. As you lie there, gazing up at the rough-hewn wooden beams above while your doctor swabs the feverish area with a sponge that might last have been washed around the time Nero fiddled, you can almost hear the leeches cheer in unison. The Romans relied on them like modern folks rely on anxiety medication or pizza delivery for late-night comfort. Just think of them as nature's tiny vacuum cleaners, the doctor might say, as if you've forgotten how much horror stems from intimacy with things like sucking blood. What's a little discomfort, after all? If anything, it builds character. You wince as the doctor presses down with more force than he ought to on your vein. Just one more pint and then you'll feel as light as a feather, he claims. But for now, flirting with the edge, surrounded by shriveled leaves and a few ambitious houseflies, dizzy becomes a gentle understatement. You're experiencing the ancient Roman equivalent of a harsh hangover, except without the glory of a wild night out. Now, let's chat for a moment about the tools of this trade. Ever seen a Roman surgeon's toolkit? It's like a horror film combo. A knife with more personality than a middle-aged soap opera star. Assorted hooks and clamps that would make a dentist quiver. And, guess what? More leeches than you could shake a stick at. These doctors were definitely more prepared than your average barber. Because why wouldn't you take a little slice of flesh while peddling haircuts? It's all about offering deals, after all. Hair off the top, blood off the bottom, and maybe a little spiritual cleansing while we're here. And do you know what's even wilder? The aftermath of bloodletting wasn't just about feeling faint. Oh no, it was often a social affair. Friends might come by to witness your brave attempt at dying in new and interesting ways. What a champ, they'd exclaim before offering you what they claimed was grape juice, but might well be the sourest concoction a Roman could whip up. You really showed that excess blood who's in charge. It's the kind of victory parade you never saw coming, complete with crucifying regret. Afterward, perhaps, you could find solace in the knowledge that bloodletting was a relatively popular practice among the wealthy elites too. You wanted to fit in, right? If you weren't bleeding, were you even living? You'd simply bite down on the closest hunk of coarse bread, because what could be more nurturing than the ambrosial taste of neglect? You bravely don the persona of a mid-tier Roman citizen, and by the end of the day, not only is your blood flow restored, but your status has elevated. Who says bloodletting doesn't have its perks? So next time you're dealing with a bad day, just remember to take a moment to appreciate the wonders of modern medicine. While you may not be racing to take a pint out for a leech party anytime soon, you can rest easy knowing that the world has shifted, and so too have our conceptions of health. The rubber gloves, the sanitation, the actual tests, what a dream come true. And as you drift off to sleep tonight with sweet dreams of sterile procedures and patient doctors, send a small salute to the ancient Romans, who truly knew how to live life on the edge, or maybe just a bit too close to the upper limit of their blood supply. Did you know that leeches were the ancient doctor's go-to method for almost everything? Want to rejuvenate that tired spirit? Just throw a couple of these slimy fellows on your arm. That's right. Meet the unsung medical heroes of ancient Rome, the leech. In a world without antibiotics, germs were basically just party guests nobody wanted to invite. So, with their charming little fangs and a penchant for sucking blood, leeches came to the rescue, or at least attempted to, with their own brand of dubious enchantment. Picture this. You stroll into a Roman doctor's cosy little office, decorated with tools that look like rejected medieval arts and crafts projects. Ah, yes, the physician says, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. What seems to be the trouble? With a hefty sigh, you explain the common ailments of the day. A headache, a touch of dysentery, and maybe an unsettling feeling that Aunt Maxine is plotting against you. The doctor nods knowingly before announcing, I have just the remedy for you. He reaches under the table and produces a glass jar filled with wriggling leeches. Toward the back of your brain, alarm bells start ringing louder than a Roman church bell. Now don't panic, the doctor reassures. These little wizards will work wonders. And just like that, you're laid back on the treatment table, 2 leeches clamped to your arm, gorging themselves on what you'd like to pretend is top-notch blood, but is more likely a mixture of cheap wine and questionable decisions. The doctor grins like a madman. See? Feel the magic? As the leeches start to do their thing, suck, swell, repeat. You're left contemplating if this is the worst decision of your life or an experience you'll drunkenly brag about with friends later on. Leeches weren't just instruments of healing. They were also a hot topic of dinner conversation throughout the empire. Once you got past the initial yuck factor, The Romans touted leeches as miraculous little beings who understood the body's intricate humours better than anyone. And the best part, they were basically free. Just kind of hang around a swamp, catch some leeches, and voila. Who knew all those school camping trips would be prep for your future medical exploits? Imagine the conversations you'd have at ancient Roman gatherings. I cured my husband's headache with a potion. Oh, how quaint. I simply applied 2 leeches. Of course, the efficacy of leech therapy was often directly correlated to the physician's ability to convince you it was doing good. They would say, "We're helping you balance your humours." Ah yes, humours. The ancient belief that your physical health hinged on a magical equilibrium of 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Want to get rid of some extra blood? Invite a couple of leeches to tea. Need to spice up your daily routine? Just let them leech onto your arm while you contemplate the mysteries of existence. Why did the chicken cross the road? That's a mystery without a leech to solve. But let's not forget, the Romans loved a good spectacle. Hence, leeches became part of medical theatrics. Conniving doctors could even set the stage for the procedure. Soft candlelight, lyre music playing in the background, and an audience of dubious friends perched around the room, eagerly awaiting the results. Oh look, it's sucking. He must be healing. Unfortunately, what was more common was someone fainting at the sight of their own blood. At least it gave the physician an opportunity to whip out even more leeches. Despite centuries of debauchery and overindulgence, leeches remain with us, not merely as relics of the past. The medical community today even recognises some of their potential. Curiously enough, modern science has found applications for leeches in blood circulation and post-surgical recovery. Talk about a glow-up! So, the next time you find yourself using medical knowledge passed down from the Romans, or more accurately, laughing about it with friends, consider throwing an imaginary leech party in your head. They may have been grotesque, squiggly little creatures, but ancient Rome found beauty in the bizarre. They drained away troubles, often with good humour and gross excess. Here's to those slimy little wizards who once roamed the halls of Roman clinics, embodying the less than glamorous reality of medical practice, where leeches were little champions going about their blood-sucking business. Salute. Ever considered that just about any ailment you had could be cured by an infusion of questionable herbs mixed with hope and a sprinkle of, what the heck is this? In ancient Rome, your go-to solution for a headache, sore throat, or even a broken heart often involved wandering into your local market and engaging in some serious bartering for a mix of leaves and roots that looks suspiciously like something your pet lizard might use as a pillow. Forget about medicine cabinets stocked with over-the-counter pills. This was a world where, "What are you trying to cure?" was answered with, "Well, let's throw everything in the pot and see what happens." Imagine strolling through a Roman marketplace, where the aroma of spices wafts together with more suspicious scents, like last week's fish market if it were combined with a whiff of something burning. Vendors eager to sell you cockamamie concoctions would enthusiastically shout, "Cure your ailments, find love, ward off evil spirits." Was their eye contact a bit too intense? Maybe. Did they throw in a leech for free? Absolutely. You're utterly confused, but hey, desperate times call for desperate measures, right? So picture this. You come down with a fever that feels like you're walking through a sauna while someone shouts "doomed" in your ear. Your answer, a trip to the apothecary. But unfortunately, you walk in to find the local herbalist dabbling in a strange new recipe. Behold, an infusion of dried roots collected during the last full moon, perfect for fevers. Does that sound reassuring? Nope. Well, don't worry. They'll toss in a few sprigs of who knows what, and suddenly it's enough to convince you that you either just bought a miracle cure or an elaborate prank. a bit like buying lottery tickets from a guy in a parking lot. And what about those elixirs? Oh yes, let's talk about tonics that tasted like a boot dipped in vinegar. The ancient Romans thought that downing a potion containing equal parts water, crushed snails and some herbs definitely came with a side of you might die, but at least you won't be bored. Can you imagine sitting around with friends swapping horror stories about the latest treatments you've tried? So, how did your last concoction go? Oh, that one. It was great until I started seeing colours that definitely weren't on the Roman palette. Also, let's not forget the homegrown remedies passed down like family heirlooms. Your grandmother would lean in, conspiratorial and earnest, revealing that a smidge of this particular root could cure all ailments, from a broken leg to a cat that no longer wishes to be petted. But only use it with walnut shells, trust me, and you're left wondering if this ancient knowledge is about healing, or if Grandma just really wanted to keep the family tradition of wildly impractical advice alive. What's next? One of your friends walking in with an undead chicken saying, "I swear it works." Now let's level up the absurdity. If you thought concocting potions was a fun potluck activity, think again. You might have had a neighbour who specialises in making syrups from tree bark and bat guano. Why bat guano? Because it's good for your skin. Or so they claimed. Plus, nothing says natural remedy quite like stench. Did they care about your complaints? Of course not. The guano was sold with the promise of flawless skin and a lack of rat friends. But way off into the distant wilds of Rome, someone was likely enthusiastically scribbling down this advice, keeping track of which herbs worked, which ones left people with pesky rashes, and which tended to make them scream, "Help!" in the middle of the night. Such is history's investment in herbal exploration, and for every grandmother whispering sage secrets, there's a dedicated herbalist trying desperately to pen the herb book of the gods, while possibly hallucinating about bats. So there you are, sipping your concoction, pondering life choices about your newfound relationship with nature, while secretly contemplating who is responsible for the occasional batch of leeches being thrown into the mix. But then your fever subsides. Was it the potion? The miracle of the guano? A freak coincidence? You'll never know, but you do know one thing. You'll never look at herbs the same. Welcome to the chaotic world of ancient Roman remedies, where herbs worked wonders and the fine print was a synonym for good luck. Welcome to the hallowed halls of Roman medical education, where the only textbook is a collection of "Trust Me, I'm a Doctor" pamphlets. What exactly did these schools teach? How to make a diagnosis using nothing but hexes and a lot of guesswork. If you are hoping for a robust curriculum filled with lectures on anatomy, you might as well be asking to study at Hogwarts. Because honestly, the medical education of ancient Rome was a circus of confusion. Let's step inside one of these illustrious institutions and gaze upon the chaos. Picture young medical students, decked out in togas that have seen better days, huddled together while a professor gesticulates wildly, perhaps holding up a pickled liver for dramatic effect. The curriculum primarily consisted of starry-eyed scribbles, faux pas, and shared blunders more akin to a game of charades than an enlightening experience. One of the main faculties, the observation of the unfortunate. Here students would gather in the local market, scrutinising the ailments of the commoners and doing their best Arnold Schwarzenegger impressions as they tried to diagnose them. Let's face it, nothing screams providentiality like relying on the judgment of a bunch of peasants who can't tell the difference between a boil and a peach. The professors might as well have handed out magic wands to diagnose ailments, as the accuracy levels were shockingly low. Seriously, with a strong breeze blowing through the classroom, these physicians could have been useless witches or wizards at best. And don't even get us started on their examinations. Instead of the high-stakes tests we know today, Imagine being wandered through a marketplace blindfolded with the task of diagnosing attendees by just sniffing. Ah, yes, the unmistakable scent of garlic. Clearly you've been afflicted by a very social life. It's no wonder that even the medical students' families sent gift baskets of wine. Anything to distract them from the sheer absurdity of their education. In this world, knowledge was passed down more through bartering stories than documented practices. So, if you were looking for reputable mentors, you might just stumble across a local butcher claiming expertise in the field of tetanus. What's this cut infected with, you might inquire, only to receive a sage response concerning how he once bandaged a goat's leg in the heat of summer, and everything turned out okay. You'd think that with such ridiculous incompetence, the Romans might have turned to the learned Greeks for guidance. Surprise. The Greeks were undoubtedly the trendsetters of the ancient medical world. For every philosopher you could find musing about the four humours, though, there was a Roman doctor willing to upsell an esoteric mix of mustard seeds and goat hairs as a miracle remedy. Did the Romans follow the Greek injunctions? Not on your life. They were far too busy inventing their own brand of chaotic. Treatments. Now let's talk practical applications, because what's the point of a questionable education if it can't be put to the test? During the time of great plagues and rampant diseases, just imagine the scenario. Young Roman doctors brandishing odd concoctions while the general populace bats their eyes confusedly. Yes, bring your families to receive the state-of-the-art treatment of leech therapy combined with moon phases. This is also when things got really strange. The professors, realizing their students had a knack for whimsical remedies, started implementing field trip Fridays. And wow, what an enlightening experience, right? Picture students marching into graveyards to collect herbs in hopes of proving their worthiness to be called healers. They'd return home hailed as heroes merely for the bouquets they'd collected. Never mind that the only thing being cured was their boredom. In the midst of all this chaos, you'd almost have to admire their tenacity. These medical students fumble their way into adulthood, armed with little knowledge but overflowing with the conviction to leech or poke their way into history. Did they revolutionize medicine? That's debatable. They may not have advanced healthcare as much as they'd hoped, but by the end of their education they certainly left an indelible mark, if you can trust their kind of teaching, that is. In conclusion, Roman medical schools were a mixture of inspirational aspirations and absurd incompetence, casting a comedic shadow over the education of ancient healers. From the dubious textbooks to eye-rolling examinations and peculiar therapies, students practiced their craft with a whimsical sense of goal. None of it was particularly effective, but at least it set the stage for future generations to appreciate the absurdity, clarity, and competence of modern medical education. And for that, a toast is definitely in order to the Romans, who may have blundered their way through medicine but filled every chapter with laughter. They believed charms and spells could do wonders for health. Would you take advice from a shaman who recommended biting into a mouldy loaf of bread while chanting your own name? Well, in ancient Rome, that was a perfectly acceptable remedy. Forget the sterile environments of modern medicine. When it came to treating ailments, Romans had a flair for the dramatic, along with a basket of questionable charms. Picture this: a bustling Roman marketplace where vendors peddled herbs, potions, and a bit of snake oil, because why not? A little magic and superstition can go a long way. Strolling through the market, you could hop from stall to stall, soaking in the aroma of fragrant herbs and, well, not so fragrant sacrifices to the gods. You might spot a woman in a colourful toga, shaking a shaker filled with dried lizard tails and muttering incantations to cast out your cough. Want a love potion? All you need is some crushed centipedes mixed with last week's straw and a little ritual dance under the full moon. It sounds like a plot twist from an ancient soap opera, but the Romans were all about blending the mystical with the medicinal. Now, let's talk about the power of charms. These magical little trinkets could range from intricate amulets designed to ward off the evil eye to simple threads tied around your wrist, because nothing says, "I'm healthy," like a frayed piece of string. Have a headache? Don't just pop a pill, they didn't have those yet. Instead, you'd clasp a crooked stick in your left hand while standing on one leg. I mean, who needs Advil when you can pose like a flamingo and hope that the universe hears your pleas? Romans held strong beliefs in the protective nature of these charms. After all, a bit of luck could be the difference between a mild sore throat and being visited by your metaphorical Grim Reaper. What's more interesting is the way these charms reflected the everyday miseries of life in Rome. With pollution filling the air and sewage constantly flowing through the streets, it's no wonder people were so desperate for a fix. You can practically hear someone exclaiming, "I have a sore throat. Quick, let's summon a spirit to make me better." The actual sickness might have been a result of unsanitary living conditions, but hey, a little incantation felt more empowering than just, cleaning up the muck. Let's not forget the traditional folk healers, often women, who had a solid reputation in their neighbourhoods. Equipped with a mystical toolkit filled with herbs and the wisdom of generations, these ladies turned complaints into cures. Ever need a love potion? They'd whip that up faster than a barista serving a pumpkin spice latte. But if the potion happened to include anything from bat wings to Eye of Newt, well, that's part of the gamble. Should you really go for broke, especially in matters of the heart? And what about the wild mix of Roman religion intertwined with health practices? Imagine attending a ritual where you weren't just praying for health. You were also offering a chicken, some wine, or perhaps your uncle's moustache hair as a personal flourish. Devout Romans swore by the idea that healing required divine intervention. They dance, chant, and sacrifice to showcase their commitment. But no pressure, right? Let's shift gears for a moment to doctor-patient interactions. Good luck consulting with a physician who balances medical advice with weird treatments involving animal parts. "Ah, yes, I see your hand is swollen," a doctor might say, glancing at you between reading the entrails of a goat. Have you considered rubbing your hand with a freshly harvested cabbage while standing on your neighbour's lawn? If they scream, it means it's working. As you can imagine, the superstitions that swirled around Roman medicine left many wondering if they'd be better off making a deal with fate or just sticking to good old-fashioned hygiene. But ultimately, for every dubious charm or slightly rotten loaf of bread, there was a belief in collective healing, a vibrant community effort to fend off diseases and ailments that sometimes felt as merciless as an army of gladiators. With a dash of mysticism and a sprinkle of absurdity, Roman health practices remind us that perhaps the real magic was less about curing ailments and more about giving hope in a world that often leaned toward chaos. So, the next time you feel a sniffle coming on, you may want to consider this ancient wisdom. Instead of picking up a packet of cold medicine, just find a pigeon, chant your name 3 times and hope for the best. After all, they say laughter is the best medicine, unless, of course, you happen to be a mouldy loaf of bread. Let's talk about Rome's approach to public health, where sewage canals doubled as communal toilets. Quite the setup. You don't need an appointment for this consultation, just hold your breath. Picture yourself strolling through the vibrant streets of ancient Rome, with the glorious Colosseum in view, and the intoxicating aroma of Mediterranean food wafting through the air. But wait, what's that smell? Ah yes, the delightful mix of fresh-baked bread mingling with the unmistakable scent of waste. Yes, in the grand empire that brought you aqueducts and gladiators, the sanitation story is less glorious and more, well, a stinky affair. Imagine hopping onto a bustling street next to the neighbourhood public latrine. You see happy Romans lounging around, casually discussing the latest gossip, while squatting over what's essentially a shared bench with a hole. How's that for a public bathroom experience? It's a bit like taking part in a group meditation retreat, except, without the whole finding inner peace part and a secondary risk of falling into the shadowy depths below. Let's take a closer look at these public toilets. They featured long stone benches with strategically placed holes, allowing multiple citizens to commune with their inner thoughts and with each other. Just imagine the camaraderie, awkward eye contact, brief moments of silence broken only by the sound of squishing mud and frustrated sighs. Ever tried sharing a secret when your neighbour can hear everything? It's not called the cloaca maxima for nothing. If you've ever fantasized about bonding with friends in uncomfortable situations, this was the ultimate team-building exercise. Since the waste had nowhere else to go, it made its way through the city's sewer system, essentially a Venice that never quite figured out how to float. Thankfully, these sewers did lead to the Tiber River, so if you managed to hold your breath just long enough, you'd be sending your droppings on a fine ride downstream. Just remember, anything you deposit there would make its way back to you one way or another. That's right. Urine and human waste had a way of creeping back into your life, literally. They say the Romans knew how to recycle, and they certainly did, albeit with a bit too much enthusiasm when it came to their bodily fluids. But the Romans believed that the air itself could be an enemy to cleanliness. They often attributed diseases to bad air, or miasmas wafting ominously through the streets. Picture soldiers at gates keeping out the germs with their swords and shields. "Stand back, foul air," one might proclaim. You'd half expect a sign that says, "Breath at your own risk." That was their version of a health advisory, and public service announcements didn't even exist yet. Healthcare in ancient Rome also involved some very questionable methods of avoiding illness. For instance, they believed that a lack of hygiene was a result of the gods punishing them for something they did wrong. That's right. If you were feeling under the weather, you'd have to spend more time wondering which gods you ticked off than actually seeking treatment. Picture a Roman citizen, drenched in sweat, muttering, "Could it be Venus? Maybe I forgot to say my prayers last Tuesday." Can you feel the thrill of desperation? It's a riveting plot twist in an already thrilling life. And for those who were a bit more enlightened regarding public health, Romans did have some innovative features. The aqueduct system, though brilliant, often came with a side effect of contamination, with people feeling pretty good about their clean water, while not noticing the human waste tumbling next to it. Ever tried drinking lemonade made from that? You might rethink your order when the waiter brings out the pitcher laced with a hint of something you can't quite identify, but may have once belonged to a long-forgotten meal. But still, the Romans did try. They built baths with elaborate systems for hygiene that seemed to far outpace their actual latrines. Bathhouses became social hubs where citizens could wash off a day's worth of grime. Sure, you couldn't escape the smell outside, but come inside, and you could luxuriate in a socially acceptable steam bath with community gossip echoing around the tiled rooms. Just don't expect any essential oils. Those had yet to be invented. Instead, you got hot water, a few eager slaves with buckets, and plenty of frolicking social chatter to mask the odour wafting in from the alleys. In this historical romp of bugs, leeches and unhealthy plumbing, one thing is for sure. Romans might not have perfected hygiene, but they certainly knew how to turn public health into an all-in-one sensory experience. So as you slip into your hygienic, temperature-controlled bed tonight, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come, while cringing just a bit at the shared experience of your ancient counterparts. Happy dreams. Imagine a hospital where the decor is more medieval dungeon than sterile sanctuary. Welcome to Roman healthcare. How comfortable do you feel lying on a straw-filled bed while receiving leech therapy and unauthorized foot rubs? Yes, my dear patient, ancient Rome is here to serve you a side of misery alongside your medical woes. In this twisted version of healthcare, you might find yourself in a dimly lit chamber, with walls that have seen more blood than a gladiator's arena. The air is thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, old herbs and a dash of despair, because nothing says, "let's get better," like a room full of sick people mumbling incantations while grappling with questionable ailments. As you lie there, pretending your mattress of straw stuffed with who knows what isn't the definition of discomfort, think about your fellow patients. Some are likely bedridden peasants clutching their stomachs, hoping for relief from ailments as common as a pesky cold, or as lethal as the plague. Others are clearly wealthy sorts, complaining about the lack of fresh figs and good wine to soothe their delicate constitutions. And what's on the menu today? Ah, yes, a hearty serving of pottage and a cup of moderately safe wine. In Roman hospitals, patients were admitted to wards based on the severity of their conditions, which effectively meant shouting, "I'm on my deathbed," usually cut in line. And about that line, it ends at a rather grumpy barber surgeon who doubles as your resident medical professional. Because let's be real, who needs a sophisticated degree when you have a razor-sharp blade and a bit of charisma? You'll find him decked out in a blood-stained apron, ready to bleed you dry or give you a haircut, whichever feels more necessary. Yes, with every cut, you might just receive an extra leech or two to go along with the charm of increased blood flow. Now let's talk about treatments, because you might have an affection for leeches, but not all patients shared that sentiment. Your average Roman physician might prescribe everything from leech therapy to a blend of herbs and a prayer to the gods, hoping for a miracle. Good luck. While the upper class might receive freshly caught fish steeped in rare spices, the common folk are just grateful if their doctor remembers their name by the time they leave. With that in mind, the actual medical procedures would make your dinner at a sketchy restaurant seem like a 5-star dining experience. Imagine having a wound stitched up with thread that looks suspiciously like it belongs in a haystack rather than your body. And in case you're worried about cleanliness, just throw caution to the wind. Sterilization was about as popular as politely declining a dinner invitation to a toga party. Not at all. After a procedure, don't expect a follow-up. You'll need a team of vigour in your corner for that. Instead, the aftercare consists of the doctor casually waving goodbye while you're left with zero instructions except to drink plenty of water. Unless, of course, water happens to be teeming with more bacteria than the town's communal toilet. Remember, you can safely enjoy your recovery as you're nestled back among the aroma of sweat and bad decisions with the rest of your fellow patients. When it comes to the social aspect, let's not forget about the entertainment value of the Roman hospital, where gossip runs rampant and friendships form like hepatitis. Nothing bonds human beings quite like shared misfortune. Oh, you have a fever? Well, I had a leech bite on my foot that took an hour to find. Welcome to therapy through vicious comparisons of your ailments while nursing your wounds. You'll laugh and bond over your shared plight until you realise your new hospital buddy is off a tad too often to chat with the barber surgeon about his special leech cocktail. As miserable as it may seem, this cauldron of discomfort mirrors a twisted form of community. Yes, you might joke and moan on the straw-filled beds, but there's a peculiar spirit in sharing your hospital horror. Friends make up the life around you, despite the wretchedness of Roman healthcare. After all, you could either suffer alone or together while passing around unsavoury tales of medical misadventures, because in an ancient Roman hospital, laughter and leeches coexist. So what if you wake up with more holes in your body than a colander? At least you may snag a new friend to share the ghost stories of life in a leech-infested hospital. So, should you ever find yourself on that straw bed, keep your wits about you and remember, solidarity is key when navigating the bumpy roads of Roman healthcare. Not every doctor in Rome had your best interest at heart. Some might just be out to make a quick denarius. How's that for a surprise twist? Imagine strolling through the bustling streets of Rome, You hear merchants hawking their wares, street performers entertaining the crowds, and nearby, the faint wails of a patient in expert hands. You glance at a sign outside a makeshift clinic promising miraculous cures, all for a nominal fee. With a name like Dr. Augustus the Magnificent flaring in gold leaf, how could you resist? But as you edge closer, you notice Augustus seems more interested in his newest collection of leeches than your number 37 ailment. In ancient Rome, medical qualifications resembled the sort of vague promises you'd see on a late-night infomercial. Call now, and you too could be cured of leprosy by this very candle. To train as a physician, you didn't necessarily need a degree from some prestigious institution. For many, it was more about networking, who you knew instead of what you knew. One doctor even claimed that his secret to surgery lay in the divine whispers from a goat he kept nearby. Suddenly, the concept of medical malpractice takes on a whole new level of absurdity when the doctor's inspiration is a bleating barn animal. And what about the actual treatments? Some practitioners adhered fervently to the idea that the body was composed of 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and anything that went amiss was simply a matter of these humours being out of balance. Easy enough, right? Just balance those jugs. The prescription for correction. Bloodletting. A robust method of healing that never failed to siphon off at least a pint of blood while ensuring the doctor had a neat little side job with the local leech industry. Now that's a win-win situation. But who needs scientific rigour when you can just engage in ritualised bleeding? Many could make a living with a floor space, a few jars, and a penchant for dramatic storytelling. Ever been cure-hungry? You might stroll into a clinic only to be greeted by someone attempting to sell you a surefire cure for flatulence, involving marinated snails and a talisman made from their shells. And let's not forget about those who boldly claimed they could treat everything from a cough to an existential crisis, all in one session. Their one-size-fits-all approach was greeted with equal parts skepticism and desperation, as the average Roman was caught between trusting their instincts and adhering to the wild claims of a doctor. Caught in a medical carnival, you'd watch patients succumb to therapies that range from shifting diets to prayer rituals. Not to mention the medications that often looked suspiciously like wine mixed with you-don't-want-to-know ingredients. Ever heard of powdered mouse droppings brewed into a tea? Well, you'd better believe it was on the treatment menu. One minor scratch and the next thing you know, a doctor has concocted a grand potion that would also embarrass any self-respecting beverage with a name like garlic elixir for good fortune, and maybe a little stomach trouble. Your willingness to believe ups the chances of being a patient in some medical performance art piece. But irony reaches its peak when a courageous Roman, desperate for a remedy, finds themselves telling the town gossip of the doctor's suspiciously charming wife, who ironically happened to be a jack-of-all-trades when it came to alternative healing. With each tale told, the line between the physician and the charlatan became blurrier than ever. Perhaps it was an old wives' tale that claimed certain ailments could be cured with a touch of sage and a host of colourful claims about your neighbour's cows. In this world of healing, it was almost impossible not to feel a bit bemused. You'd learn how to decipher the local charlatans amongst the so-called legitimate practitioners through an absurd game of who had the most outlandish title, whether it be Praxidike the healer or Nestor of the unseen sources. Ultimately, navigating the Roman medical landscape was an exercise in faith and improvisation. When visiting the doctor, you were simply rolling the dice in an ancient game of chance, except instead of a pair of dice, you'd be leaving with a combination of leeches and a gentle warning about the dangers of bad air. Ah, this stomach-churning world of Roman medicine, where every visit was a gamble and health felt like a matter for a philosopher, or perhaps for the gladiators in the Colosseum, because if you're going to gamble on your health, you might as well do it in style while watching a lion devour someone else's regrets. enter the world of women who are often more skilled than their male counterparts, albeit less celebrated. Did they have the magic touch, or were they just practitioners of trial and error medicine? In the bustling streets of ancient Rome, while male doctors donned their togas and saw clients with extravagant leeches in tow, women flexed their healing skills quietly behind the scenes. These female healers, known as medicar, were crucial to the community's health, often relying on herbal remedies, folk wisdom, and a little intuition. Imagine it. While the boys were fancying themselves the next Hippocrates, women were diving headfirst into the world of potion brewing and wound dressing, probably with a 50% survival rate fueled by both skill and sheer luck. Picture a woman named Flavia. Every morning she gathered herbs from her garden, whispering sweet nothings to them as if they could hear her. "You're going to make someone feel better today, my lovely Basil." When someone came knocking on her door, desperate and pale, she blended her concoctions with the precision of a master chef and the flair of a magician pulling rabbits from hats. Ever tried mixing wormwood with honey for a stomachache? It sounds more like a prank gone wrong than a remedy, but it's what Flavia did while keeping a straight face, exuding confidence that bordered on the supernatural. And oh, how she knew how to work a crowd. Now, let's discuss the social landscape of medicine. While men occupied positions in official medical schools and passed themselves off as learned physicians, women remained the unsung heroes, often considered witchy figures dabbling in the mysterious arts. Although they were practical and resourceful, they often faced stigma, much like that friend who shows up to brunch with a no-carb plan. These women understood the balance of nature, body and spirit better than a barista knows your coffee order, yet their mastery was usually overlooked despite the results. After all, it's hard to argue with a miracle cure for a fever derived from elderflower. Can you imagine the hushed envy of the men when the matron of the household brought her ailing child to Flavia, only to leave with a child who could finally sleep without needing a leech as a nighttime friend? Male physicians were left scratching their adorned beards, wondering how exactly a simple herb could outshine their sophisticated, blood-toting theatrics. But there Flavia stood, calm as a Roman summer evening, waving her lavender-scented wand, while proving that sometimes the simplest answers are the best ones. Not that the aristocrats were keen to give her credit for it. Moreover, let's not forget the community aspect of these women healers. They often had a tight-knit network with other women who shared remedies and strategies, not unlike a modern-day Pinterest board for the desperate and ill. They gathered after childbirth or during monthly cycles, discussing everything from postpartum depression to how to keep your husband snoring at bay, all while knitting a tunic for the neighbour's toddler. Imagine the tales spun over those gatherings, filled with laughter, shared wisdom, and the occasional gossip about the village doctor who swore by a cure involving, yes, more leeches. But it wasn't all sunshine and elderflowers. The power dynamics were a tricky dance. Male doctors may have been envious, but they also had the backing of societal infrastructure. Many of them wouldn't blink before condemning a woman's practice, branding it as sorcery because what good is competition if you can silence it? The ancient Roman health system wasn't shy about tossing around labels, sometimes with impunity. Yet these women persisted. They catered to their local communities, treating the wounds and ailments that nobody else dared touch. You could say Flavia was a pioneer of public health, pushing against societal bounds while possibly scaring off a few patients who mistook her herbal brew for poison. After all, the ancient world might have been chaotic, but even in their uncertainty, people were craving a cure that didn't involve high drama or sharp blades. The legacy of these female healers lingers on even in today's practices, reminding us that sometimes it's the quiet strength of the underdogs, those dedicated wives, mothers and daughters who bolster the bright world of medicine. Who needs a toga when you've got a basket of herbs and the wisdom of centuries? Perhaps the next time you're sipping herbal tea, lift a cup in tribute to Flavia and her sisters, the unsung champions of health who defied the odds and wielded nature's remedies like true warriors. Let's discuss the sacred oath that all doctors swore to. But in Rome, would walking up to a doctor muttering Hippocrates' name really make a difference? Or just make you feel better while you bleed internally? You see, Hippocrates wasn't just a name to drop at cocktail parties. He was the star of the healing scene, the prince of prescriptions, and the guy who put the hippo in Hippocratic. Well, sort of. In Rome, the Oath of Hippocrates was a beautiful scroll filled with all the things a good doctor should, allegedly, do. Treat the sick, keep their mouths shut about patients, and, if all else fails, blame it on the stars. But let's get real for a moment. How seriously did our ancient Roman friends actually take it? You can practically hear a doctor's sigh as he reads the oath, rolling his eyes. Sure, I'll vow to help the sick, just as soon as I figure out which handful of leeches works best for a brain tumour. Yes, the best method was to treat everything with leaves, incantations, and the occasional bloodletting session. If you thought your consultations at the local clinic were weird, just wait until you hear what happened when you misdiagnosed a fever as divine wrath. Spoiler, bad things ensued. As it turns out, many Roman doctors had their interpretations of this sacred oath, similar to how modern politicians interpret campaign promises. Some went into practice armed with textbooks and a sense of morality, while others were giving prescription advice only slightly more reliable than a fortune cookie. They believed that being potent was better when it came to being a physician than being honest. You could argue they were simply dramatizing your average healthcare experience. Imagine strolling into a Roman-era clinic where the doctor flips through a dusty scroll to find the cure for your headache, only to misinterpret it as a sign that you should be bathing your feet in wine. Ah, but why not, you think? At least it's a party. However, upon seeing the doctor begin pulling larger leeches out of a tank, you might reconsider just how committed you are to this wine foot soak plan. Back to our ancient physicians. They took the oath seriously, but in a way that could best be described as having a laugh at your expense. Surgical methods? Ha! You don't even want to know. One doctor allegedly suggested to a patient that he should simply address his ailment with the power of command, which seems great in theory until you realise that command in this sense involved begging for mercy while they let out all your blood. Trust me, you don't want the last thing you hear to be a doctor shouting, "Hippocrates would be so proud," as they chop off your infected leg. And let's also not overlook the fact that ill patients were often viewed as trials of divine will. If the gods weren't pleased with you, well, in the physician's eyes you probably deserved whatever was coming, your way, especially if it involved a session with some fancy herbs. Maybe you were cursed. Maybe you just needed to pay your tribute at the temple. Let's pour some more wine on that wounded ego before we dive into the madness that will be your treatment. Believe it or not, the Romans were more concerned with their image than healing their patients. Why? Because a well-attended doctor meant a thriving practice, and what better way to show off than to crown your latest herb blend with a pinch of Hippocratic pride? Who needs evidence-based medicine when you can impress your friends with a recipe that includes mumbling a name from a scroll while leeches slink around in a vial beside you? So, as you nod off tonight under your clean blankets, remember the sacred oath of those ancient physicians, which, as you can see, could either equip you with the tools of healing or land you with a not-so-pleasant goodbye party of leeches and wine feet. Whether it's a miracle of modern medicine or the dubious charms of ancient practices, let's agree, we've come a long way since then. And when you next see your doctor, hold off on the ancient wisdom. Just ask them to stick to the prescriptions, preferably without leeches, and a fresh bottle of wine instead. Sleep well, dear friend, knowing the only thing your physician might use to treat you tonight is a prescription pad and maybe an occasional dad joke. Good night. Discussing the plagues that ravaged Rome is like opening a particularly dusty scroll of distressing wisdom. Instead of modern quarantine practices like isolation directives, we find the ancient Romans practiced their own version of keeping the sick at bay, not through scientific protocols or information campaigns, but rather with much shouting, a few gestures, and a healthy dose of hysteria. In your newly discovered Roman life, if a friend fell ill with a mysterious fever, or a cough that could rival a legionnaire's war cry, your first step would not be to call a physician or send them chicken soup, but to sprint to the nearest intersection and shout, "Beware! Plague bearer coming through!" The locals would scatter, and your friend would be left wandering the streets like an old, uninvited party guest, still trying to enjoy the festivities of life, while everyone practically gestures with horror. Imagine yourself in the bustling forum, where debates happen and trades are exchanged like children trading pebbles. Now picture it interrupted by a chilling announcement. A plague has emerged. And just like that, the jolly scene turns into a chaotic marketplace akin to a bad reenactment of a gladiator fight, minus the armour but loaded with raised pitchforks. Neighbours would exchange uneasy glances, hastily packing up their wares while sending furtive accusatory looks in the direction of the ill. Talk about a friendly neighbourhood. No one wanted to be the next victim, so the public health strategy quickly devolved into an exercise of shouting and avoiding eye contact. The solution? Simply shout instructions to the sick person across the street. "Stay over there. We've got enough trouble without you spreading the love." It's a strategy that was far from subtle. The association of ancient sneezers, which absolutely did not exist but we can dream, definitely needed more research backing this plan. Roman healthcare did have a few standout features, and one of them was the hiccup of public health inspectors called aediles. When plagues swept through the cobblestone streets, these brave souls had the task of monitoring the health of the public. Their techniques were akin to modern eligibility tests, except their system required much less science and a lot more observing whether a person had a concerning cough or whether they looked pale enough to rival a ghost. If you were called before an aedile, it was time to play "What's Under My Tunic," as they inspected you like a merchant inspecting wares, somewhat pokey, with a hefty side of dread involved. But let's dig a little deeper into the chaos. The term quarantine comes from the Italian word quaranta, meaning 40. Why 40? Well, because who wouldn't want to isolate themselves in an itchy, flea-ridden patch of straw for about 6 weeks? This was the time they decided was necessary to ensure that any plague symptoms either showed up or popped out of existence. Just imagine the discussion surrounding this idea. Let's hang out for 40 days, but don't worry, I'll bring snacks from my crusty loaf stash. The reality of being quarantined in Rome isn't pretty. Cleanliness, as we understand it today, was mostly seen as a luxury item. When you weren't avoiding sick neighbours, you were grappling for survival as illness crept through the cobbled lanes like an exasperated cat looking for its next nap. You could evoke sympathy from the neighbours, but good luck getting them to bring over anything but scorn as they fearfully muttered, "Best to keep the distance, better safe than sorry." Should illness strike you during this plague dance, your new primary care was a mix of leeches. Yes, leeches again, and perhaps a magus, whose knowledge of the stars might either confuse your ailments or actually send you into a new round of delirium. With a little luck, your diagnosis might involve staring at a constellation chart while your neighbour shouts things like, "I heard agaricus mushrooms can help. No, wait, that's poison." It turns out rumour-based medical advice was popular long before online forums. Forget WebMD, we had old Gaius down the street, and he was a prolific maker of questionable claims. In the grand theatre of Roman life, disease put the spotlight on everyone, perhaps too brightly. From the casual merchant to the high-ranking senator, illness didn't care about your social status. As long as your symptoms sent you coughing into the realm of uncertainty, you bore the weight of the Roman Health Committee's strained conviction that shouting at you from across the street could somehow suffice, because in the end, every fever dream awaits an audience, and they only hoped the crowd stayed safely on the other side of the street during the show. So, as you drift off tonight, snug in your comfy bed with central heating and good hygiene, remember that while modern medicine has come a long way, the sounds of shouting and gossip, alongside neighbours refusing chicken broth, are echoes from a past that still resonate humorously around the world. Who could have guessed that the ancient Romans had a more theatrical way of demonstrating quarantine than any of us? Ancient Romans had strange ways of treating the mind. Would you feel comfortable being told you were mad because of the alignment of stars while forced to eat mystery stew? Don't forget to wash it down with lukewarm water, because who needs hydration when you can just let the universe decide your fate? In the vast expanse of Roman medicine, the mind was a mysterious place filled with chaotic beliefs, and it certainly wasn't something you'd want to navigate alone. You had a headache, your humours were off balance, feeling a tad blue. You were probably possessed by mischievous spirits who just loved to party in your psyche. Imagine visiting a healer, desperate for some clarity about your mental state. You're greeted not by a psychiatrist, but by a priestess wearing a toga, bejewelled with charms meant to ward off pesky demons. Before you can say, "I just need a good night's sleep," she's throwing a handful of dried herbs into a pot, murmuring incantations that sound suspiciously like your neighbour's dog barking 6 blocks away. The atmosphere is thick with the scent of burning rosemary and desperation. The mantra on repeat becomes quite clear. Let the smoke cleanse your mind while we stir up a brew fit for a questionable feast. The Romans loved their rituals, especially when it came to diagnosing what they deemed madness. When you think of the ancient world, you might envision noble philosophers pondering existence, but instead they were just as likely to be treating the mentally unstable with a cocktail of popular herbs, bizarre chants, and their secret ingredient, fear. As you sit in the makeshift consultation chair, probably just a log with questionable splinters, you're asked a series of probing questions about your dreams. Was that a giant chicken or your mother-in-law? Both? Ah, well then. Time for an emergency bloodletting just to be safe. In this delightful mix of paranoia and philosophy, the Romans believed that mental ailments could result from a skewed aura or imbalance of humours. Your body was an elaborate network of fluids. Had you ever thought about that while feeling overwhelmed? Imagine your treatment plan consisting of a strict diet of gruel and dusty bread while clenching your teeth to stay calm. But no, what you really need is a good leeching, they would insist, plopping a slimy little fellow on your forehead like he's the therapist of the day. Because naturally, if you feel down, the best cure is to drain out the purported bad humours. Communal healing gatherings would also be the order of the day. Gather round for group therapy, Roman style. With everyone sharing scratched up wooden stools in a dimly lit room, you'd have people yelling across the table about how they were afflicted by bad air last Tuesday, or how celestial bodies were conspiring against them. The laughter echoed as tales were spun, blurring the lines between absurdity and reality. Laughter, after all, was said to cure madness. So-called madmen often became the life of the party, rattling around leech-infested laughter. Who knew you just needed to lose the last vestiges of dignity to cure the blues? Amidst the chaos, you'd find some practitioners who leaned into a more innovative side of ancient Roman healing. Picture a mind reader, a woman wearing odd boomers adorned with feathers, attempting to interpret dreams while peering into a bowl of dubious clear liquid. her own idea of scrying. What other worldly wisdom could she deliver while pouring something suspiciously like old soup? "Ah, I see," she'd proclaim. "You've had a dream about a giant guinea pig. It means you are destined for riches, but only after a fierce battle with a flock of angry geese. Quite similar to your current mental state, if you ask me." Never mind the actual science behind mental well-being. What you needed was a community that believed in the power of chants, rituals, and the occasional goat sacrifice. Should you be plagued by increasingly disturbing thoughts, or simply find that your neighbour's cat looks a bit too judgmental, it'd be wise to turn to Roman remedies, which traditionally consisted of shouting loudly into the void and hoping for the best. So next time you find yourself feeling slightly unhinged from reality, perhaps just remember, the ancient Romans may have had it right, or at least the right mindset. Instead of therapy, we've got an ancient prescription of dread and remedies that include leeches, prayers, and overcooked mystery stew. Now that's a nighttime soap opera intriguing enough to retire to. So as you cuddle up under your clean sheets tonight, just imagine how ridiculous it would be if one day your biggest concern was how many leeches it took to get through a rough patch of cosmic disarray. Life could always be worse. Just ask the ancient Romans. Curious about the most common procedures? Let me tell you, the tools may have looked terrifying, but if the doctor had a decent aim, you just might survive to tell the tale, or not. Picture yourself lying on a makeshift table that resembles a butcher's block more than a surgeon's operating theatre. Your surgeon, who may or may not be sober, approaches you wielding instruments that could have been borrowed from a butcher or a blacksmith, both of whom had more legitimate business than any ancient Roman doctor. There's a chisel that might have been used to carve your neighbour's tombstone, a rusted blade that was possibly involved in the last livestock slaughter, and let's not forget about the cupping cups that have seen better days. If you squint hard enough, they definitely resemble kitchenware. As the doctor hovers over you, you can smell the faint whiff of vinegar mixed with something distinctly fetid. Spoiler alert, that's probably not a good sign. "I'll just make a small incision," he reassures you with all the confidence of someone who has not studied anatomy a day in their life. The incision, mind you, could be anywhere from a quick poke to something that looks suspiciously like they're trying to carve their initials in your abdomen. You'll wonder how this person ended up with any patients at all. But then again, competition was lacking, and beggars can't be choosers, right? Once the incisions are made, the real circus begins. Surprisingly, the Romans did have a few surgical techniques that actually showed promise, if you don't mind the risk of being an unintentional character in the next tragic play. For example, removing stones from the bladder was a popular procedure, typically performed with, drumroll please, a slender instrument that could double as a spear. The goal was simple: poke about until the stones, which could be as large as a goose egg, made their regrettable exit. You'd think that having a weaponized implement shoved into your nether regions would deter people. But no. The thrill of possibly being a walking medical marvel made people desperate for the procedure. What's a little pain when I could be the one person who survived an invasive surgery? Talk about setting goals. Anesthesia? Oh, don't even get me started. Your pain relief options consisted of wine, which they insisted would do the trick. It was like getting ready to ride a roller coaster without any safety harnesses. Just pour some wine down your gullet and hope the ride ends quicker than your hangover the next morning. If the wine didn't cut it, maybe the doctor would offer some plant-based concoction. If you were super lucky, they might even have some powdered opium. But in a world where we're trying to prevent pain, and we forgot to sterilize anything lived side by side, you were essentially signing a contract that said, "I'm ready for whatever nightmare unfolds." Let's not forget about the manual aspect of surgeries either. Surgical practice often resembled something you'd expect from a circus act. The doctor might have had a team of assistants ready, modern-day aunts who had too much to drink at the family reunion, trying to hold you down as you screamed about the sanity of your decision. More often than not, it didn't help that the bustling hospital, if you can call it that, was prone to all manner of interruptions, whether it be a loud, raucous party in the next room or the local authorities searching for a liquor thief. Nothing says we're totally professional, like performing dissections in the middle of an enthusiastic group of toga-clad partiers who probably just pulled a few late-night olives. In some instances, these procedures could result in miraculous recoveries, almost turning the doctor into a celebrity. Did you hear about the guy who escaped with his life after being stabbed a dozen times? But let's be honest. For every success story, countless others fell victim to surgical malpractice that would put even the best horror movie to shame. We're talking skyrocketing infections, unspeakable agony that no amount of wine could wash away, and a high chance of infection that made Tom Cruise's character in that movie Outbreak look like he'd just gotten a cold. When it's all said and done, the ancient Roman medical field was a wild mix of genius, madness, and leech devotion. A topsy-turvy affair that hardly seemed to prioritise healing over theatrics. But hey, if you survived to tell your tale, you'd be a candidate for some future amateur medical documentaries. So the next time you think about feeling glad for modern medicine, just remember that sweeping under the rug centuries of leech-stuffed trauma and laughter was all part of humankind's extraordinary adventure through history. Imagine living in a world where the rich receive high-end leech treatments, while the poor are handed a particularly ill-tempered chicken. What's your therapy plan today, rich kid? In ancient Rome, wealth didn't just mean having a big house or fancy toga, it meant access to all sorts of extravagant medical oddities. For the elites, healthcare wasn't just about healing, it was a status symbol, a performance art where only the finest leeches were invited to the party. You could stroll past the grand atriums filled with marble busts of the elite, who might or might not have been as healthy as the statues that adorn their villas, and find your local physician prescribing a full-body leech makeover. Wealthy senators could casually toss around a few denarii to have a skilled physician come over to administer treatments involving the same creatures that the average plebeian had to watch from a distance, probably while holding their very stressed chicken. Because while you're sipping fancy wine and complaining about your gout during a lavish dinner party, those poor folks are praying that their chicken doesn't start a new family in the backyard. But let's delve into the actual treatment. When a wealthy Roman felt that familiar twinge of a sore back or a case of the sniffles, they'd call upon professional leech handlers, people who had likely gone through rigorous training to discern the subtle art of leech selection. What qualification might that entail, you ask? We can only assume that it required extensive coursework in Leeches 101 and how to use your imagination when things go wrong. Imagine lying on a plush silk-clad bed, surrounded by imported lyres and luscious fruits, as a physician announces that today's leeches are flown in from a distant province, each one more regal than the last. Meanwhile, you may be sceptical, wondering if they got caught up in first-class seating. But the Romans weren't just splurging on travel, they had to look the part. The physician gently places the leeches on strategic areas of your body, whispering sweet nothings about circulation and health as the leeches begin their cosy dinner. And guess what? If you dare look away from the royal treatment, you'll spot that your poor neighbour's physician is handing out dried herbs and the occasional apple slice, with only a generous prayer for accompaniment. Good luck with that, you think to yourself, contemplating which category you'd prefer in the grand scheme of leech therapy. But at the end of the day, the elites got their money's worth, not just in focused treatments but in lavish rituals. After a leech therapy session, wealthy Romans could indulge in luxurious oils and perfumes to smell faintly of, well, not leeches. Imagine basking in your marble tub with aromatic eucalyptus and lavender while your leeches quietly work their magic. Now, that's a spa day. Contrast this to a plebeian next door who might be dipped in the same ointments used for their chicken, smelling less like royalty and more like yesterday's fish market. As with all good things in Rome, however, luxury had its pitfalls. While the rich were out throwing leech parties and dabbling in opulence, they were equally susceptible to the beliefs in the mystical powers of their pricey treatments. "This leech will cure your headache," a physician insists, flashing a grin, while waving away any thoughts about the actual medical practices of the day. The end results? Excuses for spontaneous parties featuring blood-sucking friends and wildly exaggerated tales of miraculous recoveries to go along with the glamour. But we can't lay all the blame at the feet of the rich. After all, the elite sought out these extravagant remedies, definitively convinced that their wealth could buy health, and health could buy status. Perhaps they believed that with enough coin, they could dodge the stabbings of fate that awaited commoners. The unfortunate realization, many of them wouldn't be any better off than their less fortunate counterparts. It seems that status wasn't exactly a shield against mortality. As you drift off into the soothing embrace of your modern sheets, thankful for your actual healthcare experience, remember this tale of ancient Rome, a place where sturdy leeches ruled the healthcare system, and high-priced therapy sometimes did little more than drain their clients both financially and literally. Because while you might enjoy a nice herbal tea that calms your nerves, have a quiet chuckle for the Romans who thought leeches were a fashionable fix. They didn't get the memo that the only thing more expensive than a treatment was the disappointment when it didn't work. So remember, modern medicine might seem imperfect at times, but at least you won't be negotiating with a doctor over zebras of leeches and grappling for the last squawking chicken on the block. Romans believed the mind and body persisted post-mortem. So what kind of medical wake-up call do you think they provided for the departed? Picture this. You've just shuffled off this mortal coil, and instead of a bright light or the sound of heavenly harps, you're met with the prancy little dance of a throng of doctors wielding leeches. Yes, leeches. It's an odd greeting for sure. Welcome to your next great adventure, or at the very least a questionable sequel. The Romans had this intriguing concept called the soul, often seen as a delightful mix of your character, experiences, and yes, all the ailments you once had. What if the leeches come along as some sort of bizarre posthumous insurance policy? Do they suck out the bad vibes you carried through life, leaving you with lighter balances? Imagine the doctor standing over your body, checking the state of your humours while nobody's looking. "Well, we have a situation here," he declares to the air. "His gall is overly yellow, that's bad." The next step? Bloodletting. Because clearly nothing says, "Welcome to the afterlife," like a sharp instrument and a couple of squirming leeches. You thought your life was tough? Welcome to eternity, where instead of rosé in hand, you might end up with a leech or two adding some special seasoning to your post-mortem spa day. As you begin this strange journey into the afterlife, the Romans believed that the funerary practices had profound implications for your ongoing well-being. The body was prepared with care. Riddled with fragrances from prized oils and a good dose of herbs, your lifeless vessel was meant to be a welcome mat for whatever came next. You might find it oddly comforting that your relatives laid you in a tomb, complete with a fine selection of snacks. Yes, ancient Romans believed you'd need nourishment as you frolicked through the netherworld, much like a dreadful family picnic but viewed through a poor lighting filter. At this point you might be wondering, what kind of food pairs best with being dead? Will there be bread sprinkled with good vibes? Maybe a few pomegranate seeds? But this wasn't simply a buffet of ancient delicacies. It was all tied to belief systems that dictated everything, from who gets in and who gets dragged off to the forbidden depth of regrettable decisions. The Romans had a very practical approach to these rituals. They believed that success in the afterlife required careful choreography through various moral turns, vacuuming up anything that might cry out from the grave. And speaking of vacuuming up, welcome to the underworld's unfortunate waiting list for judgment. This was no 5-star hotel experience. You might find yourself battling both philosophical musings and the fact that half the time your body was slowly being scavenged by maggots you might have booed out of life. That's right. The Romans borrowed from their own uncertainties. They performed intricate rituals determining if you were worthy of a place in the heavenly realms or just destined to cycle through the misery of the hereafter. Were you a decent human during your living days? Or did you spend them burrowing into the psychological metadata of malintent and questionable life choices? Enjoy wading through that thought. This moral assessing was led by none other than the notorious Judge Minos and a few of his leftovers from life, those pesky leeches with an agenda of their own. The Romans weren't ones to pass judgment lightly. They'd rather latch on to the sentiment of scrutinising every good deed you ever did, while also keeping record of that embarrassing moment when you learned a new skill and accidentally set your tunic on fire. Aroma of failure mixing with sweet, sweet judgment. Now, let's not overlook the wisdom the Romans had about ensuring that your tomb had all the right perks attached. Decorate it with victory wreaths. Stock it with your favourite picks from the market, grains, meats, and if you're lucky, a jug of fine wine. Because nothing eases the journey quite like a vintage. Found yourself in the eternal waiting room? Might as well theatre crunch on breadsticks and wait for your heavenly review, am I right? Classic Romans, creating such elaborate spool that a trip to the afterlife resembles a well-prepared buffet that half the family forgot to pick up in the first place. So, which leeches shall we summon for this unlikely adventure? It's anyone's guess, really. Nevertheless, remember that in ancient Rome, death wasn't about closure, but about an ever-looping experience. So whether you found your pastimes dipping sandwiches or swabbing the deck with a leech, at least one thing was for certain. The Romans made sure you had the best, often hilarious send-off possible. And if the afterlife didn't laugh, they sure did leave room for some ridiculous leech-themed therapy sessions. Welcome aboard this timeless comedy cruise of life. Just keep your limbs intact and a twinkle in your eye. Next medical wake-up call might be lounging around the corner, just waiting for you to ascend. Ever heard of a public healer? They're the unsung heroes of health, stopping disease in its tracks, sometimes with a few cheeky leeches and a whole lot of ignorance. In ancient Rome, these public health figures weren't just your average neighbourhood helpers. No, they were a mix of roadside magicians, medical advisors, and maybe a few overzealous town criers. Imagine a fervent fellow, dressed in a tunic that hasn't seen soap in a century, enthusiastically chasing after sickly citizens wielding herbs, charms, and undoubtedly a healthy dose of superstition. Walking into town, you might hear the faint echo of, "You've got a cough? Have you tried shouting shoo at it and offering me a chicken?" That was the bedrock of Roman public health philosophy. When in doubt, make a dramatic gesture and hope for an audience. Now think about what public health looked like. Your local healer, likely a retired soldier or an overly chatty woman with a knack for herbal remedies, was often the first line of defence against ailments. They possessed zero formal training, but did boast an impressive collection of old wives' tales and questionable folklore. So, when the plague hit and folk started going down like cheap wine at a feast, you could bet your last sesterce that your local healer was ready. Armed with a frothy concoction of herbs they probably got from a field labelled enemy territory, and a copy of 50 Ways to Scare Off an Illness, their mission was clear. Save the day, or at least distract folks from their ailments until the real doctors arrived, if they ever did. Speaking of real doctors, let's discuss the tension between these public healers and the actual physicians of Rome. You know, those guys who studiously pranced around in togas, discussing humour theories, while sipping on wine that was probably too fancy for them to get sick from their own remedies. Public healers had an image problem when compared to these toga-clad medical magicians. Picture this. As a public healer poured a potion made of goat droppings and crushed nettles over a patient, the trained doctor would suggest bloodletting to cure everything from sadness to splintered toes. Public healers, upon hearing this, might mutter a less than silent acknowledgement. At least I have a lower rate of collateral damage. But here's the real kicker. Even amidst the comic chaos, public healers often had better relationships with townsfolk than the elite-learned physicians. While Roman doctors focused on the humours, an ancient mix of bodily fluids that sounds more like a barbershop quartet than a legitimate medical theory, public healers quickly learned what patients wanted: someone to care. You know, the basic requirement to validate their existence while dodging death's parade outside their doorsteps. They'd listen to village woes while casually tossing in their health tips with a wink and a nudge, like, "Ever tried shouting at the moon?" Works for "My cousin Thaddeus, especially during summer." As the years shuffled by through the sands of time, public health in Rome saw unexpected developments, albeit none that would blow your modern socks off. They created aqua publica, public fountains, for clean drinking water, but also overhyped it as if it were a rare delicacy. You'd overhear someone exclaim, "This fountain has the divine blessings. It surely cures broken dreams and Mondays." Public health figures dramatically championed faucets over the foul muck that often wound up in streets. An improvement that felt revolutionary at the time, even if their plumbing still had more leaks than a gossip circle. Now, it'd be remiss not to mention that despite their enthusiastic efforts, public health figures faced monumental challenges, including rampant disease and uncharted territories of ignorance. So how did they cope? Constellations of hope and a surplus of salt herbs, mostly. Their methods were like a buffet of remedies. You never knew what you'd get. Sometimes they'd hand you something that would revive your spirit and your fever, while other times they'd just hope you'd bless the next full moon. But through it all, they were faced with unwavering dedication to the community, because when you lived in Rome, ignoring illness was like ignoring the fact that it's raining with no umbrella. In the grand coda of Roman public health, perhaps the end result is one long, deep sigh. They may not have possessed the sterile conditions or scientific accuracy we know today, but those public healers wielded creativity, compassion, and an endearing lack of expertise that, admittedly, kept the good folks on their feet, sometimes literally. Because in a world where medicine was still a chaotic mash-up of hopes, hilarity, and the occasional hero, at least someone was trying to care, or at the very least deeply misunderstand the parameters of hygiene. And in Rome, that was what counted most. So remember, the next time you see a doctor, you might want to secretly thank those bizarre public healers who paved the way for compassionate, albeit flawed, healthcare. Folk traditions were a wild ride, prescribing everything from bizarre charms to animal sacrifices. Maybe health wasn't so bad after all if you had a chicken ready for offering. Welcome to ancient Rome, where your wellness was literally in the hands of local mystics and healers who combined more spells than medical knowledge and often made magic their first resort. Why consult an actual physician when you could toss some herbs, mumble a few rhymes and hope for the best? Imagine yourself wandering the ancient streets, faint from a headache that wouldn't quit. You might have stopped by a local healer who was just as likely to be wearing a tunic decorated with the scales of a recently sacrificed goat as a sterile lab coat. You approach, squinting against the Roman sun, and are greeted by a woman whose breath smells suspiciously of burnt duck feet, incense, and perhaps a hint of unguent. She examines your forehead not with concern, but with an exaggerated expression of, "I totally know how to fix this enthusiasm." Her solution? a blend of jumbled herbs, an incantation involving your name and possibly your mother's maiden name, and a promise that this will surely rid you of your headache. Will it? Who knows? You can't be certain if the real cure was the concoction or the fact that you just gave her your prize chicken as payment. Nothing says health like negotiating for your well-being with a farm animal. In ancient Rome, health was as much about ritual as about remedy. The line between mystical and medical was where the real magic happened. Healers often lived in very real fear, or was it belief, that if they cursed the wrong neighbour's peacock, they could be struck down by invisible retribution. So prescribing chicken sacrifices wasn't just good for your headaches, but also an excellent way to keep the gods from frowning upon you. Then there were the charms. Oh, the charms! Picture this. A sassy little charm sat at the bottom of a pot made for witches, probably a dubious mix of iron nails, spider webs, and something green and slimy that you'd rather not ask about. Need luck in business? Dance naked around a goat while chanting your ambitions. Heck, maybe it'll work better than filling out a business plan. Perhaps you wondered, is this folk tradition real? Well, in Rome, necessity often gave birth to a lot of inventive remedies, mixing the practical with the completely ridiculous. Feeling bloated? You could be cured with a cleansing ritual involving garlic, vinegar and pine cones. Remember, it's like trying to fix a hangover with pickle juice and glitter. Is the cure ever as effective as the healer himself deliberates? It's like being sold toothpaste filled with hopes and dreams instead of mint. Animal sacrifices were another crowning achievement of folklore medicine. Imagine being in the crowd, witnessing the thatching of a goat as the healer explains the real benefits of using fresh blood for your itchy skin. The gods love a good sacrifice, they'd say, half shouting over the drama unfolding before you, which is both unsettling and fascinating. Maybe you give a nervous laugh, partially convinced that offering your neighbour's goat would be the perfect way to ensure your skin stays clear forever. Folk healing often blurred the lines between madness and wisdom. While some might describe a treatment like a fever dream induced by bad ham, others would label it the all-natural experience. Who knows? Maybe their advice to gargle with vinegar while upside down could actually be transformative. Why wouldn't you want to drown your ailments while feeling like a circus performer? As you return home, you might wonder how much these wacky traditions truly helped the common folks of ancient Rome. Historical records indicate that while folk medicine wasn't always reliable, it evolved alongside more formal practices. Confusing? Absolutely. Most people likely opted for a bit of everything. A leech plus a goat, or a pinch of ground unicorn horn mixed with herbal tea, just to cover all bases. So, the next time your head feels like it's spinning, consider channeling your inner Roman folk healer. Just remember, a bouncy chicken is your friend, and as long as you mention a few supernatural beings in your incantation, who knows? Perhaps you'll wake up feeling like 1,000,000 denarii. After all, when every health issue could be fixed by sheer absurdity, why not enjoy the ride? Your body, and potentially your neighbourhood chicken, will thank you later. Medical treatment often resembled a theatrical stage. Who needs a doctor when you've got dramatic flair and a flair for the ridiculous? In ancient Rome, a visit to the physician was less about receiving practical care, and more about being part of a grand performance. As you step into one of those famed Roman hospitals, if you dare, you're greeted by doctors dressed in flowing togas, gesturing wildly as if auditioning for a lead role in a tragedy. Imagine them reciting their lines. Alas, poor patient, what awaits you here is equal parts cure and calamity. The sounds of moaning patients echo through the marble halls like a chorus of mourners, each one vying for the attention of the nearby physician, who is likely more interested in shaping his dramatic persona than treating ailments. Your heart races as you consider your ailments. But wait, what's that bubbling cauldron, bubbling ominously in the corner? Is it a potion to heal your ills, or merely yesterday's vegetable soup left to stew? One could argue, with good reason, that Roman doctors thought of themselves as magicians more than healers. They'd often claim knowledge of remedies derived from the mysterious realms of the gods, even going as far as selling cures that included powdered animal organs, crushed gemstones, and herbs that may or may not have been exotic weeds plucked from a sidewalk garden. There's nothing quite as comforting as being told that your fever can be cured by a potion made of ground horn and a dash of unidentifiable fluids. And let's not forget the doctor's favourite spectacle, patient surgeries performed with the precision of a butcher demolishing the town's livestock. Welcome to the operation theatre. Picture this scene. You're strapped to a table, a wooden board beneath you, while a barber surgeon brands it as a bed of healing, ironically emulating the glamorous credentials of a genuine doctor. As you squint to assess your surroundings, you notice the surgery unfolds under the watchful eyes of an audience that includes your cranky neighbours and an overly inquisitive child holding a very suspicious-looking stick. At least if it's a flop, you think to yourself, I'll go out in style. The instruments laid before you resemble a medieval torture rack. Rusty blades, blunt scalpels, and a selection of suspiciously sticky bandages. Your heart races as the surgeon approaches, balancing a leech in one hand like a dramatic prop. Fear not, for today I shall set you free from your mortal coils, he announces, taking a bow forward as if this is the moment he's been rehearsing for all his life. And where does the crowd fit in all of this, you wonder? These spectators aren't just passive observers. Oh no, they squander gory tales and graphic descriptions of their own maladies, root canals of old, the inevitable ingrown toes from long-forgotten sandals, to spice things up. You soon realise that not only does your doctor wield both caduceus and charm, but that every visit is a chance for gossip. Did you hear about old Marcus? Had a leech ordeal yesterday that left the whole neighbourhood buzzing? Much like a modern-day reality television show, the Roman practice of medicine was edgy, unpredictable, and packed with cliffhangers. You'd leave one physician's side just to encounter another who may suggest the reversal of all the remedies you just received. One moment you're purging your body of bad humours, which apparently include anything from sadness to moderate perspiration, and the next it's a recommendation to spike your breakfast ale with liquid opium. As the curtain falls on this vibrant act, will you leave with a resolution, or only heightened anxiety? The stakes are just as high as they are in a state-sponsored gladiator arena, but instead of armour, today's battle comes dressed in white linen and topped with absolutely zero medical ethics. Think of it as a dance with leeches, and the audience is watching every move. So as you find yourself back in the comfort of your clean sheets and civilised care, remember the wild world of Roman medicine, where it was all a show and the jokes were often on the patient. There may have been suffering, disaster, and sheer terror, but at least you can snuggle down tonight knowing your modern doctor probably won't ask you to bring your own leeches to your next appointment. The Greeks were basically your overachieving cousins, setting the stage for all Roman medical practices. Did the Romans take any notes, or did they simply let their leeches do the talking? Picture a world where a Greek doctor named Hippocrates is rolling up his sleeves, ready to revolutionise the way medicine is perceived. While he's predating the Romans by a bit, his ideas seeped into Roman practices like olive oil into a fresh loaf of bread. Now, instead of diagnosing you based on whether or not you've offended the gods, they're starting to lean on reason and observation. What a concept! So, let's imagine you've just stepped into a Roman clinic where a doctor in a toga is scratching his head while poring over a scroll of ancient Greek texts. he mutters, examining your symptoms: fatigue, a rash, and the fact that you accidentally drank the water from the public fountain last week. This might be a humoral imbalance, he declares, completely ignoring the fact that last night's lentil stew may also have contributed to your current state. Thank you, Aristotle. With his theories about bodily fluids influencing health, your physician begins balancing your blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile as if he's preparing a 4-course meal. Ever heard of the 4 humours? If you haven't, don't worry, you're not alone in thinking it sounds like a bad magician's act. In reality, it's a set of beliefs about health that lingered longer than a bad case of the sniffles. Too much phlegm? Welcome to pneumonia. Too much blood? Let's slap a leech on that and make it bleed a little, shall we? Each humour played a role in your overall wellness, and if you weren't feeling fantastic, you could be sure someone would try to adjust the flavour of your bodily soup by any means necessary. Imagine needing a cure for a headache. Instead of popping an ibuprofen or slurping something caffeinated, Romans might suggest you mix some honey with a dash of opium and camphor, because of course, nothing says I care like a recipe that sounds more like an exotic dessert gone wrong. Herbal remedies bloom under the Stoics, who treated health more like some epic philosophical debate, rather than a straightforward healing process. Forget about soothing chamomile tea. Your options are roasting roots and herbs like they're about to star in their own drama. Fast forward to the surgical suite, or whatever constitutes a surgical suite in ancient Rome, and you might be surprised that Greek influence wasn't just limited to herbs and potions. Romans adopted simple but effective surgical techniques seen in ancient Greek texts. While your average barber surgeon might wield a rusty blade for your bloodletting needs, they at least borrowed some principles from the Greeks. The hygiene practices? Well, let's just say those still required some serious improvement. Surgery was akin to playing fast and loose with a game of chance. Picture this. You're lying on a straw mattress, and the doctor, having read Hippocrates but not necessarily understood the concept of sterilization, decides it's a grand idea to operate without so much as a soap between him and ancient history. Some say the best anaesthetics were the drinks the patients had before the procedure. After a few cups of weak Roman wine, you might not care if they were removing your leg or muddling your hemoglobin levels. No wonder surgeries were often conducted under the most questionable conditions. And speaking of questionable, let's address ancient Rome's penchant for using animal parts in medicine. Want to cure your fever? An eye of a newt and the liver of a lizard will surely do the trick, as recounted in some of those overly optimistic medical texts. Do we trust those methods today? Nope. But because the Romans splashed a Greek name over it, suddenly the treatment sounded sophisticated. The reality? Greek teachings laid the groundwork for Rome's medical explorations while fumbling over more bizarre remedies. They may have influenced methods and terminology, yet when it came down to it, Romans made it their own with a flair for the absurd. From Greek reason to Roman remedies, it was all one massive leap, or spill, into the wonderful and weird world of ancient healthcare. So next time you're about to pop a pill at the onset of a headache, maybe spare a thought for the poor souls in ancient Rome who had to navigate their way through a medical minefield of leeches, unwarranted surgery, and herbs that might have been more dangerous than effective. They say laughter is the best medicine, but if only they had the foresight to swap out the leeches for a few stand-up comedians, then maybe they wouldn't have taken their health decisions so seriously. What happens when you mix divine intervention with the persuasion of ancient medicine? The results are as chaotic as it gets. Say hello to priests doubling as physicians. In ancient Rome, medical advice often came with a heavy dose of spirituality. Your sore throat might very well be the result of a grumpy deity rather than a pesky cold. So, instead of just swallowing some honey and lemon, you'd be dragging yourself to the local temple for a ritual that involved chanting, and perhaps a chicken sacrifice. Because why not? A bit of bloodshed right before your next appointment adds drama, and possibly elevates the overall quality of the experience. As you stumble into a marble sanctuary adorned with flickering oil lamps, you might find a priest examining a distant patient. They don't just check your pulse, they check your stars. Sick? Oh, it's not the flu, it's the alignment of Mercury causing chaos in your humours. What are humours, you ask? They're like the ancient Romans' version of your 6 o'clock news, determining your health based on the temperament of 4 body fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile. It's like a cosmic cocktail party gone awry. Now let's imagine you're the one with a headache because your neighbour's goat was bleating all night. Instead of just popping an aspirin, your concerned friend drags you to the priest instead, who, while donning a ridiculously elaborate robe, might scold you for not being in harmony with the neighbourhood goats. Once in the temple, he waves incense around you, declares that divine spirits are angry because of a misaligned pot of lentils left on the stove, or perhaps just because you borrowed his best toga without asking. Sacrilege much. Forget those mundane OTC solutions. The Romans firmly believed that every illness stemmed from heavenly displeasure. If your fever wouldn't break, it's not just a fever, it's a sign that the gods think you're not praying hard enough. A good old temple visit offered a chance to launder your sins along with some mystifying potions that closely resembled the foul remnants of last week's pottage. Those remedies included delightful concoctions featuring animal fat, murky water, and the occasional leaf. So fear not. At least there's a hint of greenery in the menu. Now, can we talk about the priest-physicians for a moment? They were a masterclass in multitasking, effortlessly shuffling between their responsibilities of determining your spiritual worth and saving you from the wrath of hypothetical illnesses. A haircut one day, divine healing the next. Imagine asking for a trim only to walk out feeling like you just survived a sacrificial ritual with a questionable outcome. It was like a cross between a barbershop and a druid meeting gone wrong. When patients did get to woo the gods through a major sacrifice, which often involved humble goats instead of your average chicken, odds were high that the presiding priest would toss a leech into the mix just for good measure. After all, leeches were considered sacred. They were the VIPs of the healing process, far more trusted than the sad-eyed dog you might have adopted last week. But wait, the fun doesn't stop there. If a priest's efforts did lead to a miraculous recovery, don't think it was entirely out of the goodness of their hearts. You'd better believe there was a chariot load of offerings headed their way, with grateful patients presenting everything from freshly caught fish to sprightly goats. Thanks for saving my life. Here's a gift that could rival a royal feast. And don't forget the public praise. If you pulled through, you'd be expected to act out an exaggerated thanks speeches that could rival the best Shakespearean drama. Standing on a platform while the locals cheered, it was less holy release and more theatrical drama fest. In short, healing in ancient Rome was a tapestry of religious fervour intertwined with questionable medical practices. With priests leading the charge, the interactions between medicine and spirituality turned both life and death into finely honed spectacles where leeches flowed, incense burned, and every ailment was just another divine inconvenience waiting to be resolved. So as you nestle under your cosy blanket tonight, remember, your head cold merely requires a bit of vitamin C and some rest. Unlike those poor ancient souls who needed a goat, a priest, and a lot of deep introspection. Look around. How often do we see echoes of ancient practices in today's health culture? Have we really come that far? Sure, we have fancy hospital buildings, specialists galore, and more equipment than a Roman gladiator had shields. But when you peek behind the curtain, you might start to notice that some of the remedies we have aren't so different from what those toga-wearing folks were doing centuries ago. You might even wonder if ancient Romans could have emerged from their leech-laden beds and found themselves in a modern wellness seminar. Seriously, picture it. All the leeches getting VIP access to essential oil diffusers. Let's start with the trend of herbs and natural remedies. Ancient Roman physicians were practically herbal enthusiasts, using everything from musty mint to wild thyme as their therapeutic arsenal. Does that sound familiar? Fast forward to today, and it seems every corner coffee shop has someone spruiking the benefits of turmeric lattes or the miracle of holistic green smoothies. You might even find a recipe boasting, "Try this chamomile tea for instant relaxation," as if sipping it could match the ancient ritual of rubbing freshly ground herbs into your temples while chanting, "Please let this headache go away." Then there's the rise of alternative medicine practices and the resurgence of acupuncture. Forget about visiting a flashy clinic. Imagine sitting in a candlelit room adorned with statues of Aphrodite, surrounded by sweet-smelling incense, while a modern-day healer, aka your local needle enthusiast, pokes you with tiny, sharp objects. Isn't that just reminiscent of Roman times when people went to healers who claimed they could restore balance to your bod by sticking you with various sharp instruments? It's as if the ancient practice of "let's see how many points we can hit in one session" got a makeover. And speaking of balance, let's take a moment to discuss mindfulness and meditation. Did you know that in ancient Rome, many believed that your mind was just as crucial to your health as your body? They'd socialise in forums, passionately debating philosophy while sipping on questionable concoctions, convinced the secret ward against illness was as simple as chi or witty repartee. Fast forward to today, everyone is sipping herbal tea, clutching crystals, and attending workshops on self-care, as if the Romans didn't get that memo ages ago. The irony is delicious. We now practice mindfulness techniques that are basically regurgitations of old philosophies, only we use Instagram hashtags and maybe some scented candles. Now let's not skip over the wave of detox diets and cleanses. Oh my! Ancient Romans had their own set of quirky health rules, many of which involved rather dubious substances. If it didn't make you sweat, it wasn't worth using. Today we see detox teas boasting promises of cleansing your system, like it's the best kept secret of the universe. Is it really so different from those ancient concoctions that promised to rid Romans of their humours? You're sipping on a green smoothie, while someone 2,000 years back was likely cringing over a glass of fish urine mixed with a bit of odd herbs, thinking it'd be healthier than, say, dinner-time pottage. And let's face it, much of our current approach to health emphasises balance and moderation, concepts that were very much on the radar of Roman medicine. They were obsessed with maintaining a balance of humours, blood, phlegm, and 2 types of bile, while we're out here tallying the macros in our smoothies like they're our best friends. At least today, those devout fans of the keto diet don't have to worry about them calling in leeches to help balance things out. Can you imagine the social pressure? Oh, you're only eating that. That's, how do I put this gently, not exactly the ancient Roman way. Finally, consider the world of surgery and invasive procedures. While we might think modern surgeons are gods among men, ancient practitioners were not far behind. They even had rudimentary understanding, employing techniques that, while dangerous, set the foundation for what we practice today. Ever heard of trepanation? Apparently, if you were feeling a little off, drilling a hole in your skull was one solution that made sense back then. Fast forward to today, and surgeries have certainly advanced. Sadly, the risk factors weren't cleanly erased from the equation. Your average patient might still joke, at least they're not using leeches. So, as we smile at our modern expectations, a detox smoothie in one hand and an acupuncture appointment scheduled, we realise that in many ways we've only dressed up ancient practices in highly paid health guru garments, complete with quotes from philosophers. In the grand tapestry of health, the threads are more intertwined than we think. Raise your glass of kombucha and toast to the ancient Romans. our unconventional ancestors in wellness. Do leeches still have a place in modern medicine, or have we finally drawn the line at their gooey charms? You might be surprised by their comeback potential. While the thought of blood-sucking worms clinging onto your skin might send shivers down your spine, these little critters are not merely relics from the past. They are making a strange and somewhat unsavoury return to the medical field. Welcome to a world where, despite advancements in technology and knowledge, leeches are still considered a practical solution, at least when it comes to blood circulation and healing. Imagine arriving at a modern hospital, and instead of a nurse waving a thermometer in your face, you're greeted by a smiling doctor holding a cup of leeches. These little guys are our top specialists, he might proclaim. This isn't a spa day gone wrong, or some bizarre episode of a medical sitcom. It's the actual treatment for issues like damaged skin flaps after surgery or the restoration of blood flow in various tissue types. Yes, medical professionals have learned that leeches can release a cocktail of beneficial enzymes into your bloodstream, promoting healing while also acting as finesse tools for removing excess blood. It's like having a tiny paramedic on your skin. Now, before you take a deep breath and embrace your new slimy buddies, let's backtrack a bit. Roman physicians believed that a well-placed leech could cure just about anything, from headaches to heartbreak. In fact, if you had a cold, they were more than happy to stick a leech on your nose. After all, who needs tissues when you can have a living nasal aspirator? Ancient doctors would likely guffaw at the contemporary debate over leech therapy, claiming, "You all just don't understand the magic." Even more amusing is how modern medicine sometimes mimics ancient practices without even realizing it. Take the notion of bloodletting. While we don't slam some leeches down on your skin and call it a day, there is still a principle lurking beneath the surface. For example, phlebotomy. Yes, that's just a fancy way of saying drawing blood, is a common procedure today. So in a way, we can thank our ancient Roman friends for paving the way for 21st century discovery, albeit unintentionally. But let's not get too carried away thinking that leeches are some groundbreaking miracle workers. Of course, medical professionals exercise caution. You wouldn't want your local leech doctor doubling as a barber at the same time, would you? The risks of infection and disease transmission may make you hesitate just a tad. Imagine your leech happily munching away when suddenly it decides to hitch a ride on a viral train during its last meal. Yikes! Now consider the contemporary hold-your-breath leech therapy experience. You arrive at the clinic and before you know it, you have a small army of leeches deployed across your wounds. You're lying there, heart racing, hoping they're as effective as everyone claims. Meanwhile, your inner monologue is going, "Great, I'm lying here with wriggly critters sucking my blood and I paid for this, but at least it's not a Roman dinner party." Historically, leeches were often used by physicians who sought to balance the four humours that governed everything from the state of your mental health to whether you could outrun a Roman chariot. Fast forward to modern times, and while we all know about the humours finding a cosy spot in the past, there's still an ancient whisper of their practical purpose that resonates in the bizarre fondness for leeches today. And so, as science marches on, leeches remain in the curious spotlight, giving a gentle nudge to contemporary medicine, and flickering a promise that, even in this advanced age, not all solutions have to come with a lab coat or high-tech machinery. When it comes to healing, who would have thought we'd find ourselves in a curious back and forth with the tiny critters of ancient Rome? So as you sink into your cosy modern bed, comfortably devoid of leeches, take a moment to chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Ancient Romans may have had their peculiar methods and bizarre medical practices, but isn't it comforting to know that when it comes to healing in the 21st century, we're still finding tiny, hopeful connections with the past, albeit with significantly better hygiene practices. Cheers to progress, and cheers to the quirky journey from Romans to leeches, your new, albeit questionable, best friends.